Thank you, Chair, and thank you all so much for being here today. It's great to have such a wide range of views and so much information at the committee this morning, so you're very welcome and thank you so much. I'm going to start my questions with Inclusion Ireland. So it's obviously now over a decade since the Time to Move On from Congregated Settings report was published, and there's still over 4,000 people in these settings according to the working group. And a recent HICRA report established that, and I quote, most residents who lived in congregated settings did not have the same support in place to help them exercise and enjoy their human rights. Similarly, the Ombudsman report into the 1,300 people under 65 in nursing homes identified systemic issues and negative impacts, including financial challenges, disregard of their will and poor quality of life. Based on these and other contributions, this committee has called for the implementation of the Time to Move On and a statutory right to independent living. And you highlighted the case of 1,500 people with intellectual disabilities living in, with primary carers who themselves are over 70 years of age, approximately 485 of whom are over 80. And sometimes when a family carer dies, we know these individuals are forced into a nursing home without any choice, control or a transition plan. At one of the most obviously difficult times in their lives, and despite that being, or besides that clearly being wrong and inhumane, it's just a clear breach of their rights as well. So I'm wondering if you could explain more about that type of practice and its impacts. And Paul, your story was really interesting, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. I don't think you should have to do it, but you clearly demonstrated how kind of basic freedoms and dignities were taken for granted, that we take for granted, were denied to you in those settings. And I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us more about the difference independent living made to you? And only if you're comfortable with it as well, I think you mentioned that your family didn't necessarily want that at the time. And that's just, we often hear from different families, parents, carers all the time. And I do think that so often people are trying to do really the right thing, and it isn't necessarily for the individual that they're trying to help. And that's just a really kind of complex and layered issue that we deal with a lot on this committee, and I'm just really interested to hear your insights into that and how you maybe navigated it, or any advice you might have for somebody else. And then I might ask questions for the National Advocacy Service afterwards, Chair, if there's time, and the Acquired Brain Injury Ireland.
Okay, so maybe Derval and Paul, you might respond to Holly's questions.
So do you want to talk about it and the difference it's made to your life in moving out?
Yeah,
the difference it's made to your life.
The thing about moving out, I wasn't really happy, in the institutions, really. And then someone in the institutions, if they found like a glass like that not clean, they would ring my job and then tell me it's my job to clean it. And then if the bin was just say smelly, they would ring my job and then tell me I have to clean it. And then if I done something, they say, oh, that wasn't done right. At that time. And then we used to have arguments, an awful lot in the institutions. The person used to come and kick my door and bang it, sometimes, and the staff done nothing about it. They just said, get on together, and this person has bad health, and you have to respect that. And then they didn't do anything for us, and it might stop for about 6 months and then start again. And then I wasn't happy there, so I told families, and then I told staff there, and then they said that you wouldn't be able to for living outside. And then if you want to go outside, you have to go back where you went to, like up to Aylmer Road in Newcastle, and then we can give you a place to rent. And then after that, they told me that the other option was to go up to Sagard and then live with someone you knew, but you never lived with them in your life, and you don't know what they're going to be like. And then the other option they gave me was the going out renting. And then I said that I wouldn't be able to go out renting, because it's too expensive. And then they said, if you leave here now, it's your own accord, you will be only 3 months, to give you to come back. Yeah, they were saying. So I had to fight for half of my life to get out of these institutions and independent living because I wasn't happy in them. And families didn't want me, or staff didn't want me to do all that. And then that wasn't their choice. It was my choice at the end of the day to do it. And then if you don't fight for your rights, you don't get anywhere. I'm telling you. And you have to fight all your life. But now I don't have to fight, because I went and bought my own place. And then the best thing it is that it's having the key to your front door. Yeah, really, it's very important. And able to go in and out anytime you like. And then you don't have to tell people where you are and then what you're doing.
Thanks, Paul.
Derval?
I think that's a brilliant example, Paul, of it was horrific that was the reality, but those kind of false options being provided to you, like you can either go on rent here yourself or go here and live with somebody you don't know, and almost like and you'll be back around in 3 months' time again. And that happens all the time for people because they don't have the support around making decisions. Susie and Joanne have spoken about that this morning. And Holly, you asked about real-world examples. This is happening all the time. I mentioned in the opening statement that the most fundamental things about people's lives, such as where you are going to live as a human being, are being decided by a committee right now. There are committees meeting across the country right now looking at where people are going to move to in emergency situations. And the disabled person is probably not in the room, part of that conversation, and their family may not be in the room either. I had the experience of working with a family recently, an elderly mum who is in her 80s, and her son is now in his 50s, and she has Alzheimer's and a lot of issues going on for her. And it was deemed that this was an emergency situation. So her son, she's from North Cork, had lived there her entire life with her son, really close to one another, fantastic relationship. But she knew she was at a stage that she couldn't continue. And because it was deemed an emergency, her son was offered a place in North Kerry. I had to show her on the map where the town was. And she said, I'll never see him again if he moves. And that's happening all the time.
Yes.
We're deciding on people's lives by committee. It's horrific. So we really, really need to move on from that. That's just one example. And I guess the only way out of it, there's two things. We've all spoken about that this morning, the leadership bit. We just need vision here. We really do. We need people to stand up and be courageous and say enough. This is enough. And side by side with that, we need a well thought out and fully costed plan about how we're going to do this incrementally for the next few years, because people are suffering. Joanne mentioned it in all of the examples from the National Advocacy Service, and people are waiting their lives on hold, and it's just not good enough in 2023. Thank you.
Brings me on to the National Advocacy Service. In your opening statement, you made reference to the significant growth in your waiting lists, and I know that in each and every one of these cases it represents an individual with complex needs and immediate concerns, and you anticipate a growth in your services due to the changes in the mental capacity law. So have your staff levels increased to meet the demand, and if not, is this a matter for the Citizens Information Board or for the Minister for Social Protection, or both, or what would need to be done? And you anticipate that the assisted decision-making legislation will lead to greater demand in your services. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that and what your role will be in that kind of advocacy. And then I'll go to the required brain injury afterwards if I have time, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Joanne.
Okay, so in relation to the increase in our waiting lists, obviously needless to say it's not specifically only for those living in congregated settings, because we do work across multifaceted advocacy issues. However, due to the numbers that we've looked at today in terms of congregated settings, a large cohort are in congregated settings, and that cohort have their rights infringed, possibly more than anybody else, particularly again because of the often inability for them to verbally communicate their experiences, and very often being in environments where they don't have the support to access advocacy and other services like the ones here who could potentially change their lives and make it better. So our concern about growing waiting lists, as you say, they're people, they're not numbers, and the experiences are horrific of the people on our waiting list, and the level of distress and the quickness of decision making that's being forced upon people without adequate supports to understand their rights, understand their options, to be able to know how to navigate really, really complex systems is growing all of the time. I mean, Deputy Kenny referenced the complexity of the systems. They're increasing all the time, and yet people's ability to access the supports they need are not. So it's a huge concern. To your question, who is the decision maker around that? So we are supported by Citizens Information Board. The funding comes through the Department of Social Protection. In relation to our role under the Assisted Decision Making Act, so a large cohort of those that the National Advocacy Service support would be people who are wards of court and who inevitably will come in under the new decision support service and the various tiers of support that will be available there. We also have a growing number of people contacting us who will be seeking decision-making arrangements of different kinds, and again will need advocacy support to be able to understand how that system will operate. For those who may be under decision-making arrangements, then if they're experiencing issues where, for example, the principles of the Act are not being adhered to, perhaps their capacity is not being assumed within their situation and they're having their capacity questioned, or indeed if they're having experiences with decision supporters that are not in keeping with the codes of practice, they may require support to make complaints to the decision support service to have that investigated and looked at. So it's quite significant. I mean, the forecasting that the decision support service have done around the potential figures for those who will come in under decision support arrangements are enormous. So we obviously can't be exact about the specific impact it's likely to have on the demand for our service, but we do know that it will cause further growth.
So is there a need for an increase from social protection to help deal with
Yes.
that? Yeah.
So my colleague Susie referenced already that we have never had an increase to our advocacy resources since the inception of the service. Yet year on year, the number of inquiries to our service has continued to grow. The number of cases that we have worked has grown, despite the fact that we have not had an increase in resources. And I've already referenced that the complexity of the work has also grown. So the pressure on the service is immense. And the level of distress that we hear advocates talking about only touches the surface of the distress that those that we're working with experience themselves.
Do you know what kind of an increase would be needed, say, even just to meet the existing demand, say, outside of meeting what we know will become future demand with the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act?
Well, with the figure of 250 on our waiting list, the average, caseload for an advocate, given the complexity and the types of issues that they're dealing with, is approximately 20 cases. So that'll give you a ballpark figure of, what would be required to address the immediate waiting list that's there. But with the growth in complexity of the issues and the duration, I mean, Susie referenced, the example of somebody she supported, it's taken 12 years to move. We can't walk away from people, although we're an issue-based service, and the idea is that you're there as a short-term support to see people be able to progress the barriers and overcome them. The reality is that's taking longer and longer and longer. It's more complex. So it's difficult, but certainly the concern is that those who have the least voice already are being even more marginalised and having even less rights by not being able to access advocacy. And the final point is that we have a particular remit to those living in residential services who don't communicate verbally, and if they're living in a service that does not welcome advocacy, and sad to say that is still the case in certain places, where we don't have cooperation, we don't have inquiries coming to our service despite an absolute need for it in certain places. We would ideally like to be able to get to those people by having boots on the ground and being able to identify where they require advocacy support, because they're not going to be able to pick up the phone to us or send in a form to us. That's compromised as well by our waiting list, because we simply don't have the staff hours to be able to put boots on the ground to find those people. So that is a huge concern.
Thank you.